It's now my very great pleasure to introduce to you Jeff Chu. Hiya, Jeff. So good to see you. I saw that you were here with us through much of the business session this morning. Over the course of Jeff's eclectic journalistic career, he's interviewed presidents and paupers, corporate execs and preachers, Britney Spears, who I hope gets freed soon, and Ben Kingsley. As a writer and editor for Time and Fast Company, he's compiled an award-winning portfolio, including stories on hit-making Swedish songwriters, a piece for which he had to go clubbing in Stockholm, James Bond, for which he stood on a beach and watched Halle Berry emerge from the waves again and again and again, undercover missionaries in the Arab world, where he had to travel to North Africa and go to church a lot, and the decline of Christianity in Europe. He spent a lot of time praying. His acclaimed book, Does Jesus Really Love Me?, which earned the cover of the New York Times Book Review, features his reporting on Christianity and sexuality across America. One of Jeff's prized possessions is a print of a quote from former Senator John Warner, who once told Jeff, "You're a good little interviewer." My God, what an awful thing to say. As a speaker, Jeff's experience has been equally as compelling. He's spoken to audiences in Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, and an array of other denominational and non-denominational churches across the country and around the world. He's preached and lectured at major universities and seminaries, including Princeton, Yale, Fuller, Calvin, Syracuse, and Hope. And he's also graced the stages of the Library of Congress's National Book Festival in Washington and the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, Fast Company's Innovation Uncensored and Innovation by Design gatherings, as well as the Progressive Youth Ministry, Gay Christian Network, Why Christian, and Room for All, Reformed Church in America conferences. He grew up in California and Florida, went to high school in Miami, at Westminster Christian, where he sat behind A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, in Mr. Warner's World History class. He's a graduate of Princeton and the London School of Economics, and he will tell you that he is a writer today largely because of two people. Carmen Gonzalez, his second and third grade teacher at Black Pine Circle Day School in Berkeley, California, who first taught him about storytelling, and Charlotte Grimes, whose one-semester journalism seminar at Princeton, the only journalism course he ever took, taught him that he was not a terrible reporter and may even someday be a good one. Jeff has received fellowships from the Phillips Foundation, the French American Foundation, and the International Reporting Project, and in 2012 was part of the Seminar on Debates in Religion and Sexuality at Harvard Divinity School. Jeff, the nephew and grandson of Baptist preachers, we share that, my grandpa was a Baptist preacher, is an ordained elder in the Reformed Church in America. A graduate of Princeton University, the London School of Economics, and Princeton Theological Seminary, he served as a farmhand at the Princeton Theological School Farminary. He's now a co-host with Sarah Bessey of the Evolving Faith Conference and also teacher in residence at Central Reformed Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He hates marzipan and beets. He loves the San Francisco 49ers, the Book of Ecclesiastes, Compost, and Clementines. Please welcome Jeff Chu to Eastern Synod Assembly 2021. Jeff, good to have you with us.
It's good to be with you. 早晨各位，你好。食咗早餐未啊？ I greet you this morning from the traditional lands of the Niswi Mishkadewanan, the people of the Three Fires, Odawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi. And I greet you in the traditional way that Hong Kong people greet friends and loved ones by asking you whether you've eaten yet. And specifically for this time of day, have you had breakfast? This is old school colloquial discourse. It's something your grandma, your aunties might say as a way of showing they care. It's a particular joy to be with you because even though I'm part of the Reformed Church in America, as Bishop Michael mentioned, some of my dearest friends are Lutheran, and they've spent a lot of time and energy trying to convince me that if only I were truly honest with myself, I would realize that I'm one of you. That has not happened yet, but I keep telling them to pray for me, and we'll see what time brings. One of my favorite aspects of Lutheran theology is Martin Luther's emphasis on a robust theology of the cross. And one of the most crucial aspects, as I understand it, of a lived theology of the cross, that intentional outworking of this idea such that it's interwoven into your behavior and your brain and your heart and your soul, becoming an integral aspect of how you show up in the world. One of the most crucial aspects of a lived theology of the cross is truth-telling. Just as Christ's crucifixion revealed the world for what it is in all its brutality and ugliness, and showed Christ for who he is in all his self-sacrificial beauty and his self-giving love, we are called to recognize and honor and wrestle with the truth. A theologian of the cross calls a thing what it is, Luther wrote. It's truly, I think, one of Luther's best lines. And it's so countercultural in this era of self-justifying lies and self-preserving falsehoods. And it's so unusual in this time of toxic positivity and rampant cynicism. A theologian of the cross calls a thing what it is. So in the spirit of calling a thing what it is, as I've been thinking about what we might contemplate together, I realized that at this point in your gathering, you might be tired. You've navigated new technological platforms and the weird dynamics of assembling online with all its glitchiness and all its idiosyncrasies. And I looked over the agenda earlier this week, in part because I'm a church polity geek who loves synods and assemblies and the weirdnesses of church order. And if you believe in depravity, well, there you have some evidence for mine. I even popped in for a little bit of your time together yesterday. Friends, you have been doing hard and good and necessary work. You've been talking about resolutions and budgets and the business end of life together. You've been discussing what it means to witness and how it looks to be faithful amidst a society that's still reckoning with the sins of its past and the realities of its present, even as you've been attempting to dream about the possibilities of the future. Also, in the spirit of calling a thing what it is, as I've been pondering what we might discuss, I also realized that even as there might be some energy and excitement around a theme like, behold, I am doing a new thing, there can also be some fear and even exhaustion. Certainly, I'd imagine that when that ancient prophecy was first proclaimed, its initial hearers, as Diana mentioned yesterday, exiles, the displaced, those exhausted by war and marginalization, those initial hearers might have felt some hope, liberation, possibility, return. But I'd imagine there might also have been some skepticism and some fear welling up in their hearts. A new thing right now? Haven't we had enough new things? Can't we be done with change for a bit? Where's the cosmic pause button? Because new things are hard. To those of you who are weary, those of you who could use not just a short break, but perhaps a long overdue sabbatical, those of you who are worn down, those of you who have pivoted so many times during Corona tide that it feels like you're just spinning, those of you who keep showing up for your people, even as you wonder whether someone will show up for you, those of you who long for something resembling normal, yet who fear there can be no normal, not right now and not for the foreseeable future, I want you to know that I see you. I see your exhaustion. I see your worry. I see your loneliness. I see your faithful perseverance. I see your holy persistence. I'd like to speak to my siblings of color in particular for a moment. To those of you who are so often seen, yet not heard. Those of you who are useful for the diverse photograph and the multicultural marketing, yet find yourselves not listened to and disempowered. Those of you who suffer because of the still emerging toll of white supremacy and colonialism. Those of you whose bodies and whose peoples have borne the real cost of a society that has dishonored you and your people, your flourishing and your cultures, and a society that continues to look to you to make them feel better about themselves and to tend to their comfort. Those of you who long not just for equality, but also for equity and carry a disproportionate burden as you wait. Those of you whose stomachs knot up at being in yet another white-dominated space. Those of you who are tired of well-intentioned resolutions and well-meant proclamations and just want to see what love might look like if it were not just talked about, but actually lived out. I see you. I see your exhaustion. I see your grief. I see your longing. I see your faithful perseverance. I see your holy persistence. In that spirit of faithful perseverance and holy persistence, I want to remind each of you, whether lay or ordained, no matter your background, no matter the story that brought you here today, that you are called to be theologians of the cross. A theologian of the cross gazes unblinkingly at the pain of this world and doesn't try to rush past it or turn away from it. She doesn't minimize anyone else's story. He doesn't see only the bright side, but also resists the temptation toward the gloomiest prognosis. They don't pretend something is what it's not. They don't pretend to be fearless. A theologian of the cross is utterly and completely humble, which is not to say falsely modest, because that would be an unhealthy theology of the cross, but rather they're grounded in truth and rooted in reality. In the context of God's gathered people, especially in settings like these, to be a good theologian of the cross means not just the ability to name something accurately, but also the ability to hear something named accurately. If a theologian of the cross is able, as Luther suggests, to call a thing what it is, she must also be able to hear a thing called what it is. He's not just a good observer, he's also a good listener. They don't just pay attention to suffering, they also receive stories of suffering, confess their complicity in oppression, make reparations for sin, and share the burden in recognition of and in response to a gracious God and a self-sacrificial Christ. Whatever your story, whatever your background, here's the heart of what I want to tell you today. And I think it's the only thing that will empower you through the rest of this hard work you're doing together, as well as the ministry that each of you does in your own settings. For any of this to be possible, for any of this to be real, a theologian of the cross must return again and again to the knowledge and the reality of one particular thing, and be fueled again and again by calling one particular thing what it is. You are loved. You have to be able to name God's love. You have to be able to testify to God's love. You have to be able to remind yourselves that you are loved by the one who made you, the one who redeemed you, and the one who sustains you still. You have to believe that you're loved. So my central question for you today is simply that. Do you know that you're loved? Just for a moment, set aside your agenda, put this gathering's formal governmental work at the back of your mind, and try to exile the worries you might have about worship tomorrow or church next month or next year. Beneath your fears, your concerns, your to-do lists, do you, child of God, know and believe and feel that you are loved? I'm not talking about the fleeting human affection that so many of us chase. Honestly, I wonder sometimes whether we're more interested in having fans than friends. We long for mere affirmation rather than a more difficult but more profound sense of belonging. We pursue the warm fuzzies of being liked, when what our souls actually crave is the challenging and countercultural reality of a long-suffering and divine love. Do you, child of God, know and believe that you are loved with that love, with that holy, life-giving, patient, and gracious love, which is written into creation itself and that stretched its arms out on the cross and that won out over death and that accompanies you every step of your journey? Do you know and believe and feel that this love is for you? It's a wonderful and terrible question, maybe even a little rude, if I'm honest, especially if we search our hearts and answer it candidly. And I ask you the same question that I really don't want anyone to ask me. Because if I'm candid with you, so often the answer is no, or maybe I'm not sure. I know that that isn't the accurate Sunday school answer. From the time of my first memories, I knew Jesus loves me in Cantonese and in English. But sometimes when you hear something over and over, it becomes like background noise. You stop thinking about those words and their implications. Sometimes when you hear something over and over, you might take a phrase, true as it might be, for granted. Sometimes when you hear something over and over, it runs up against the reality that you are also experiencing. And that friction might be uncomfortable, but you're good church people, right? Still, in a deeply hidden place, you might ask, are those words really true? Do you, child of God, know and believe and feel that you are loved? It might seem to some of you a silly thing to talk about this. I can't convince you of your belovedness. We don't have enough time on the agenda for that. It would be fair for you to be skeptical of this stranger who's talking to you through bytes and pixels. You can't even see if I have legs. There are no words, at least in my vocabulary, that can eliminate every shadow of every doubt that might bedevil you. But I might be able to show you a few things and ask you a few questions that might help us consider your belovedness, our belovedness. To ask these simple questions is to cultivate spiritual disciplines that could encourage your awareness of God's abundant and steadfast love, which I think will be crucial as you walk through the fears of perceiving a new thing and the challenges of participating as God does a new thing. So the first question is, how much time and space are you making in your life to regard and appreciate beauty? Some of you might immediately respond, I don't have time to do that. And my response to that, which I offer as gently as I can, is I don't think you have time not to do it. To regard and appreciate beauty is to pay attention to the visible grace with which God surrounds us. To regard and appreciate beauty is, according to John Calvin, and you invited a Reformed guy to talk with you, so you honestly didn't think we'd get through this without a Calvin quote, did you? According to John Calvin, to regard and appreciate beauty is to see sparks of God's glory glittering in every created thing. God's glory, which is to say God's ridiculous grace and God's abiding hope and God's wild imagination and God's overwhelming love. God's glory glitters in every created thing. It's in the shimmer of the sunshine on the lake and the crash of the waves as the ocean meets the rocky shore. It's in the unprecedented pattern of blue and violet, pink and magenta, orange and yellow that splashes against the horizon line at sunset, a painting that never appears the same way twice. It's in the black and gray necklace of the feathers that the Canada warbler wears across its bright yellow breast. And it's in its vibrant high-pitched song and its elaborate internalized map, which helps it journey thousands of miles southward before the winter sets in, and then thousands of miles back in the spring. It's even in you, You've been sitting hunched over your laptops and staring at your computer screens for many, many hours since this gathering began. So I would like to invite you for just a moment to sit up straight, close your eyes, adjust your body so that you're as comfortable as you can possibly be. Loosen any muscles that have tightened. Stretch if you need to. And once you're somewhat comfortable, take a deep breath in and then slowly exhale. Many of us have struggled with our bodies. Many of us can list the ways in which our bodies have let us down. Many of us can name those aspects of our bodies that we loathe. But can you see the beauty in that deep breath that you just took? Or in the 20,000 breaths that you take each day without a thought? In the blood that courses through your body without conscious instruction? In the synapses that fired and the fingers that clicked, maybe in frustration, to get you into this space today? All of this is of God. All of this points to the creative grace of God who set it into motion and who delights in it and who delights in you. And all of this is beautiful. To regard and appreciate beauty is simply to pay attention. It could be for 10 seconds at the start and the end of a day. It could be 10 minutes staring at the flowers in your garden. It could be an hour spent lost in birdsong or listening to the rain thrum against your roof. You might find beauty somewhere other than in nature. For you, the beautiful sparks that draw your attention might be in a song that returns you to goodness, or a poem that stirs empathy, the elegant majesty of 11 players moving in concert toward the goal on a football field, or the inspiring coordination of a stunning ballet, the flavors of a fine wine dancing on your palate, or the pungency of an aged cheese. All these things hold beauty. All these things can return us to gratitude and to the heartfelt knowledge and to the soulful understanding of God's goodness, God's grace, and God's provision. I'll add something to my counsel to you to regard and appreciate beauty. Take time to create beauty too. We're all made in the image of a creative God. To live into that image is to exercise the gifts of imagination and creativity. So maybe you like to cook. Perhaps you like to paint. Maybe you've harbored a secret longing to try to write a poem for the first time since your school days. Perhaps you've wanted to learn to knit, or to make pottery, to embroider, or to work with wood. Each of these activities involves us engaging with creation itself to create something new. In his wonderful book, Art and Faith, the painter and practical theologian Mako Fujimura writes, one aspect of our stewardship is to become poets of creation, to sing alongside the creator over creation. Fujimura doesn't mean we all have to write literal poems or sing actual songs. He means that investing in the creation of beauty is part of the invitation that God offers us. He challenges the common notion of beauty as a luxury good or as a mere consumer product. The arts, he said in an interview about a decade ago, are a cup that will carry the water of life to the thirsty. It's not the water itself, it's a vessel. What we're doing in the church today is we're just picking up water with our bare hands and trying to carry it to the thirsty. We can still do it, but the effect is minimized by not fully utilizing what God has given us. Maybe sometimes we're the ones who need the vessel of beauty to remind us of the living water. Sometimes we're the thirsty ones. Sometimes we need the glory of the cool liquid on our parched tongues before we remember that we can also offer it to others. To regard, appreciate, and create beauty is to recognize, give thanks for, and amplify God's love. My second question for you, how much time and space are you making in your life for Sabbath? As Bishop Michael mentioned, I spent a couple of years as a farmhand at Princeton Seminary's Farminary, which is a 21-acre sustainable farm that doubles as a classroom. The land and the chickens and the bees and the vegetables and the flowers, they serve as teaching assistants to the professors. And one of the classes I took there was called Soil and Sabbath. And the professor challenged us to reimagine Sabbath. I understand the concept of Sabbath intellectually. Everything and everyone needs rest. We need rest to have energy for whatever comes next. The land needs rest to produce crops at its full potential. But in my heart, I confess I'm not good at resting. There's always something else that needs to be done. There's always some task clamoring for my attention. There's always some labor that could be addressed. And who really can afford to rest? And perhaps like me, you were brought up to believe too that Sabbath rest is something we earn after 6 days of hard work. As the child of immigrants, I was always told you have to work twice as hard to get just as far. And I saw how hard my parents, my good, faithful Christian parents, worked to make a better life for my sister and me than they had had as kids. But there's a problem, at least from the biblical perspective, with the story we tell ourselves, with the narrative that sees Sabbath rest as our reward. You all know the creation story. My professor at Princeton Seminary recounted it with the help of Karl Barth, because this was, after all, Princeton Seminary, where Karl Barth is a demigod. So in his writings on the book of Genesis, Karl Barth methodically plods through the familiar tale. From the formless void, God carves light and dark, waters above, waters beneath, oceans, dry land, trees and plants, sun, moon, and stars, the birds in the air, the creatures in the sea, and then the land animals. And on the sixth day, humankind. God declared all of it good. You might even say beautiful. And then finally, on the seventh day, God rested. And then Barth notes something that I had never noticed before until my professor pointed it out. Contemplate the storyline carefully. What has humanity done at this point to deserve rest? Nothing. The first Sabbath is actually humanity's first full day of existence. The first Sabbath is an opportunity simply to experience all that God has made, all the goodness of the sun and the sky, the seas and the garden, the birdsong and the breeze, the blossoming flowers and the succulent fruits of all the trees except, you know which ones. God has done the creating. Humanity has done nothing. Which means that it was impossible for humanity to earn Sabbath, impossible for humanity to see Sabbath as reward. Sabbath is nothing that humanity has done to deserve. Rather, Sabbath is an expression of God's pure grace, an unconditional invitation into God's created beauty, and a tender reminder of God's love. Sabbath rest, this holy time of reflecting on God's grace and our belovedness, is not something we end on. It's our beginning. That reframing of Sabbath as God's loving expression of pure grace, unmistakable because humanity had done absolutely no work at this point in the timeline, that was transformative for me. I still never feel as if I've done enough work to earn rest. There's always more that I can do. Another email I could answer, another parishioner to call, another job to do, always a little more money to earn. I can always talk myself out of rest, except when it's reframed for me as an expression of God's love and of our belovedness. So maybe you could consider it not a literal 24-hour sundown to sundown Sabbath, which seems so impossible in this busy world, but simply a weekly commitment to a time, an hour, say, or an afternoon, devoted to seeking out and cultivating and appreciating beauty and love, however you choose to do it. Perhaps you could consider this as an acknowledgement of God's grace and a holy yes to God's invitation into sacred abundance. Perhaps you could begin to see how others around you could use the gift of Sabbath rest too. My third question for you. How much time and space are you making in your life for compost? I know it's a weird question, but if God's beauty tells a story of the goodness of creation and God's love points us insistently towards resurrection and redemption, The compost pile is one of the most beautiful sites of faithful testimony. In the processes of the compost, God has written a story of absurd and ridiculous and gorgeous hope. I arrived at my first compost pile with a lot of skepticism. I had spent most of my adult life in London and New York chasing success as a journalist and longing for belonging. And when I finally arrived at seminary, I found myself in a class at the seminary, which honestly I took because I was worried that I would just be bored sitting in lecture halls, and this seemed like a good opportunity for a change of scenery. And we were taken out to the compost pile on that first day. And our professor, Nate Stuckey, a dear and earnest Mennonite, Nate told us to grab a shovel or a trowel and dig and look for signs of life and resurrection. It was a hot, sticky, late summer day in New Jersey, and I, a delicate flower, I wasn't feeling it. But I'm also an obedient Chinese student, and so I and my classmates, we started digging. And as we probed past the recently deposited rotting vegetables and the moldering fruit and yesterday's coffee grounds and the remnants of last season's harvest, we began to see grubs and worms crawling through this mess. And as we dug deeper, we happened upon the beginnings of change, because the things of death had been sent there to be transformed. And with the help of bacteria and worms, water and air, those things of death were becoming the soil in which something new and something good could grow. As I've learned more about physical compost, I began to think about the spiritual parallels, the ways in which God invites us to surrender all that ails us, all that bedevils us, all that threatens to point us away from life. How might we surrender it? Surrender all that, so that it might be redeemed and transformed and indeed resurrected, providing us good soil in which to grow. What if we turned intentionally toward not just a habit of physical compost through which the soil is strengthened and nourished, but also one of spiritual compost, so that our souls might benefit from a similar rejuvenation? To engage in a practice of spiritual compost is to pay attention to things that might normally be beyond our perception. In Isaiah 43, notice there's a mention of the jackals and the ostriches. They are equipped for thriving in the wilderness. What might we learn from them? In the compost, too, we become aware of dynamics beyond the surface. To engage in a practice of spiritual compost is to name what's not life-giving and invest in what might be. To engage in a practice of spiritual compost is to grieve what needs to be grieved and to surrender what ought to be surrendered. To engage in a practice of spiritual compost is to confess that God has empowered change that we can't accomplish alone, just as worms and microbes partner to do it in the soil. Grace and love can do that in our souls. To engage in a practice of spiritual compost is to acknowledge what's beyond us, what needs God's help, what needs God's touch, what needs God's otherworldly love. And the practice of spiritual compost has been incredibly healing for me and continues to be incredibly healing for me. Permit me a moment of testimony. I'm Reformed, but I grew up Baptist, as Bishop Michael said, and testimony was a fixture of our church culture. I'm a child of church traditions that repeatedly questioned my belonging. Conservative Chinese culture, American evangelicalism, the wing of transplanted Southern Baptist teaching that my ancestors were adopted into, all of them deemed someone like me less than. For a time, I tried to be the good Chinese Christian son. I imagined, for instance, that I could pray my way out of my sexuality, marry a nice Chinese Christian girl, produce some nice Chinese Christian children, and fit the template that had been established for me. Until I realized that I couldn't, because that would require me to continue to lie to myself, to those around me, to the God who made me. And then the only way I could imagine to hold true to the values I'd been brought up with, integrity, faithfulness, honor, the only thing I could imagine to do was to walk away from the church. And so I did. I was one of many queer kids who saw no place in the church for me. The pastor could talk all day long about welcome, but I knew it was contingent and conditional. And in my season away from church, I felt like I was walking in a wilderness. I had lost friendships. I'd lost the closeness I'd had with my parents. I'd lost community. I'd lost what sense of belonging I had. Yet I knew all those things had been subject to a particular conformity built on a specific set of lies. And I had to surrender all that. I had to give up community, which had become an idol, things that had offered perverse comfort, and to give up so much of the spiritual infrastructure that had made me who I was. I had to grieve it, and it was painful. And honestly, some days it still is. For those of us who live at the intersections of minoritized identities, at the intersections of marginalized bodies, this can be extremely difficult. It isn't just my sexuality that marks me as different. It's also my skin and my eyes and this hair in America 2021. It's also the way I tell stories. It's how I write. It's any marker of difference, which the world in its ruthless efficiency often chooses to diminish because it's easier. It's easier than existing in tension. And truthfully, there were moments when I thought I should probably just end this life because it didn't seem worth living. I honestly don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I'm still alive, except to say that it's God's grace, God's mysterious and abiding grace that saw me through. It was a long time before I saw that there was a process at work, that through the surrender and through the grief, the possibility of a new thing was emerging. It was only later that I learned how, even in the death of something seemingly precious, God doesn't allow that to be the end of the story. There remains a seed of hope, because that's how God orchestrated nature. A plant flowers, and though its beauty is fleeting, in the flowers fading, there emerge seeds of new life. Grass flourishes, and it reaches toward heaven, drawing strength from the sun and the rain, but then it fades, and it returns to the earth, and it gives itself up to a new generation and to the nourishing of what's still to come. I don't know what you have to surrender or what you have to grieve, but I suspect there's something. I don't know what fears or what power you've chosen to make your security blanket, but I'm guessing there's something. I don't know what prestige has become your crutch or what coping mechanism has become your comfort, but I speculate that there's something. God's spiritual compost pile is ready to receive it and to turn it for good, to turn it toward the holy, to turn it toward your flourishing. But it's going to take some difficult candor and some holy honesty to get there. The theology of the compost is a good creation-based cousin of the theology of the cross. In the theology of the compost, we also have to call a thing what it is. But we don't stop there because we also name what a thing can be. I've offered you these three practices because I see what is. And I also see what can be. What can be because of the commitments and the vows you've made to God and to one another. What can be because you've chosen and or been chosen, depending on your theological viewpoint, to be a part of God's church. What can be because of God's love. Let me be clear. I don't underemphasize the enormity of this task. To be people of faith, people of hope, and people of love in a world like ours, on lands that are revealing what previous generations thought would remain secrets, in a society so riddled with sin and pain, indecency and insult, this can feel like a foolish venture. But maybe we're called to be holy fools. Maybe we're called to live lives marked by beauty and Sabbath rest and spiritual compost because such countercultural practices offer a countercultural way forward, a way that shouts for justice and equity, a way that proclaims the possibility of reconciliation and healing, a way that sings good news into a world that so desperately needs it. It comforts me to remember that we aren't the first to find ourselves up against challenging odds. In the early days of the church, one of our spiritual ancestors wrote a love letter to a group of believers he'd never met. They were, like you, a diverse bunch, and nothing really made sense about their togetherness. Some were wealthy, others enslaved. Some were citizens, others immigrants. Some could read, others were illiterate. Some had never known anything except for prestige and power. Some had recently returned after being exiled. How would they find their place again when they'd been told they did not belong? Yet gathered in living rooms around a capital of the empire, they found equity and belonging. Whatever divided them in society paled in comparison to what brought them together at the table of the Lord. Their distant correspondent reminded the gathered body of believers in Rome of how they mattered to God. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us, he wrote. For I am convinced that neither death, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus, our Lord. In telling them that they were hupernikeo, more than conquerors, I don't really think Paul was saying that they, in their bellicose time, would fight better than their compatriots or conquer in a fashion superior to that of Roman soldiers. Nor do I think that the lesson for us in our conflict-ridden era should aim to argue more assertively or more persuasively, or that we ought to deploy the usual tactics of battle in a more cunning way. No. I think Paul was suggesting to the Roman church then and to us now that there was and is another way, which is the way of love. I hope you won't mind my being so bold as to echo Paul's words to the Roman church, offering them to you all too. You too are a diverse, unlikely bunch. And in many ways, not a lot makes sense about your togetherness. You too live in a society that bears the wounds and the scars of those who have not loved well and those who have not been loved well. You too long for something and have been called into something that's greater than any one of us alone, something more compelling than what we could imagine on our own, something that will bring deeper meaning to your neighbor than even the most well-intentioned resolutions, something that will truly transform and heal our life together. I am convinced that we are called to love, to God's incomparable, gracious, long-suffering, and all-healing love. That love will empower you not to be afraid. That love will open you to try new things. That love will equip you to seek what God is doing in the world and urge you to discern how to participate so that it's life-giving for you and nourishing for your neighbor. That love will meet you when you think it's not fair, because it isn't fair, because your share of the burden won't always feel equitable or be equitable. That love will open your ears to listening and your eyes to perceiving and your heart to compassion. That love will hold you through the stress and the disappointment, the challenges of life and community, and the realities of a world that still cries out for healing. That love will express itself in lament and in praise, in mourning and in dancing. That love will buoy you and strengthen you, embolden you and meet you as you hear a voice that calls out, behold, I am doing a new thing. In the name of the one who was and is to come, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen.
Oh my, Jeff. You have blessed my soul more than you will know in the last 40 minutes. A testimony to the love of God that it was your words, but perhaps even more so your countenance and your bearing, even in this pixelated way of being together, communicated so much. And it brought to mind a chapel that we used to use for retreats in the late 80s, early 90s. And in the chapel, above the chancel, were the words, sick Deus delexit mundum, Latin, roughly translated, for God so loved the world. But one of our better educated than me colleagues went in and did an explication for us on the verb delexit in Latin. And he said, it's not just love, it's a love that takes delight. And that really captured me. And that's how you communicated the love of God to us this morning.
It's a really hard thing to believe, knowing ourselves as we do, that God delights in us, right?
Yes.
It is so hard. And I want to reiterate, I am not good at believing this, right? So the words that I spoke today were as much for me as they were for you, because I know how hard it is to believe oneself to be delightful. It's almost impossible.
Yeah. Jeff, are you okay if we open the floor up for comments and questions?
And because I know how unfriendly these settings can be to my fellow shy introverts, I do have my little Whova window up. So if there is a shy introvert out there who doesn't like to speak before the gathered body or can't unmute, as we have experienced during this assembly, feel free to type your question in the box, and I can see those, and I'll try to get to as many of them as I can too.
Awesome. So if you wish to speak, place your name in the box or chat. Steve Hofford, could you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Awesome, thank you. Jeff, thank you so much. I hope I can speak without my voice cracking. I'm sitting here beside Selena Bradshaw, and both of us were like bawling through that whole thing. It was beautiful, thank you. In the midst of it, you said, I'm not sure why I'm here. As another queer Christian, that's a question that many of us say to ourselves all the time, but I want to tell you, it is very apparent to many of us why you are here. And I think that comes across because queer people in particular have felt pain and loss from the church, but the ones that are still around also experience love and grace. And I think it's it's that queer perspective that brings voices of yours to life. And I just wonder if you can comment a little bit more on being queer and Christian and still being in the church and being a powerful voice in the church.
So this is actually a tender week for me. I have been in the process of ordination for the Ministry of Word and Sacrament for, I guess, 5 years now. It's normally in my denomination a 3-year process. And the vote on my ordination has repeatedly been delayed because of my sexuality and because of the RCA's fight over whether queer people belong. And over, folks have said to me, why are you still here? Why don't you just go somewhere else? And all I can say is that every time I've thought about leaving, there is, for lack of a better term, and in honor to my evangelical upbringing, some kind of God moment that reminds me that for now, at least, I'm called to stay. And I can't explain it in a way that will suit rational, logical minds, because my rational, logical mind thinks it's ridiculous. And then I think of Jesus, and Jesus was pretty ridiculous sometimes, ridiculous to the folks around him, illegible even to his disciples, doing acts of wonder that even the healed, even the recipients of the miracle couldn't understand. I'm fully candid that there may be moments, there may be a moment down the road when it's time for me to leave. And I do say to queer folks and to other marginalized people, there may be a time when God calls you to move somewhere else for your own flourishing and for the flourishing of others around you. So I don't know, I guess is the core answer to your question, Steve. But some of us are called, I think, to stay in places that can seem unwelcoming. And then those moments of love and grace that you mentioned experiencing, those are actually cast into sharper relief for us because of the pain and because of the unresolved stuff. So I hope that answers your question. I couldn't write out an answer, so sometimes I'm a little untidier.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Steve, for your question. Lori Polatsky, please unmute yourself.
Hi, Jeff. I think I just want to say to you, my beloved sibling in Christ, I have been where you are about a decade ago. I was on leave from call because I had married my wife and was found out and was reprimanded and set aside from the church. So I understand that struggle with filling out applications to other church denominations because you think where you are is not where God wants you to be. But I say to you, my beloved sibling, just continue to remain faithful, be open, because those who are not maybe necessarily a part of the church are still watching, and they love you, and you are a stepping stone into that Christ-like place of love, unconditional. And I can attest to that much richness will come from everything that you are walking in this day and in this time. I am so glad that you have decided to stay with us in this realm because I know, like Steve, you are very articulate and the world really needs to hear what you have to say, because not all of us are gifted with the way you were able to communicate and express that love. So thank you for hanging in there. And as an old bird that has walked before the path where you are now walking, stay strong. Know that you are beloved, and that especially you are not alone. So thank you for today, Jeff.
Lori, thank you for that word of encouragement. I take it to heart with gratitude.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Lori. Emily Walker, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much, Jeff. I'm in the group chat with a bunch of other youth and young adults at this gathering, and we're just singing your praises. Oh my gosh. My question is, what moments or time or practices do you do that make you feel most loved by God?
So before I got to the farming area, I wasn't really much of a gardener. So in Brooklyn, Brooklyn being Brooklyn, we had a couple of terracotta pots on our steps, and I did not do a good job with them. So those of you who are gardeners might be impressed by the fact that I even managed to kill mint, which I had been told was an impossible thing to do, but with God and with my skills, all things are possible. So I didn't have a lot of hope for my growing ability when I got to the farming area, and I'm learning. And one of the things I love about digging in the dirt, I have 2 plots at the community garden a few blocks away from our house, and then I have a little space in our backyard. When I'm growing things, I feel what I would say is an appropriate sense of smallness. And I know the world around us often talks about small and equates it with bad, but I think there's a right sense of smallness when you look at the grandeur of nature and the sweep of the sky and the ways in which, the constellations move. There is a good sense of smallness. There's a way in which smallness can feel right. And when I'm digging in the dirt and when I see what a tiny worm is capable of in helping to aerate the soil and to turn what's bad into what's good. And when I see, yes, I can play a tiny part in producing sunflowers or creating a tomato that my husband loves so much, I know I didn't do it on my own. That's what I love about being in the garden, is I get to play a part, but I know that I'm not doing it alone. I know that I am in some form of community. And I think we're at our best when we're called into community. I think we are at our best when we're working in concert with other creatures and not even just humans. Yeah, gardening has become the thing and the place. And the other place is cooking. I've been spending some time in conversation with a professor about the fact that in recent years, we've really developed a good theology of growing and farming. There are a lot of folks who are thinking about what the deeper meaning of Jesus's agrarian parables are, and Israel as an agrarian society and what those lessons have to offer. And then so many folks have done wonderful work about the theology of the table and welcome and inclusion and hospitality. And what's missing is that in between, the theology of the kitchen, the theology of preparation and cooking and feeding, really, a stage between farm and table that's absent. And as I've been digging into this void and trying to read and puzzle out, how might we be able to understand the stories of Scripture where we see people invited to feed others and to prepare food, including Jesus preparing breakfast for his friends on the beach after the resurrection. That has really been life-giving for me, because I love to cook. I think no matter whether you're good at it or not, that's why the internet exists and there are all those recipes, right? Anybody who's half decent at or could pass a science lab in high school or college can actually cook. All you have to do is follow the instructions and see how it turns out. And it fails one time, you try it again, because you're just replicating someone else's previous experiments. I love to see that transformation in the kitchen. It reminds me of possibility. It reminds me of the goodness that you can find in life with a little bit of patience, a little bit of heat, a little bit of water, a little bit of salt. So yeah, those are the two places for me: gardening and cooking.
Okay, we're going to do one more. Jeff, Judy Von Wall, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Judy Von Wall from All Saints, Newcomville, Nova Scotia. When you talked about space for the Sabbath and needing time to rest, that almost brought me to tears, because it seems at times there's no time to rest. You're asked to do this. I'm a mother. I work. I'm part of the church council. And there always seems to be things that you need to do, should be doing, call you for work to fill in. You feel guilty to say no. And when you do find time to rest, you feel guilty because you're not doing anything. And that just gave me permission almost to say, no, I can't do this. I need to rest. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
It's a real challenge. I agree with you. And maybe one learning for those on church councils is to express to those who sit on those councils that rest is not optional. We need it. And the church will never flourish as long as we give in to the way that culture has told us that we are judged by productivity. We are judged by the ways of capitalism. We're judged by these quantifiable metrics. But we're not, and we can't be, because there is no economic metric that measures the health of our souls and the magnitude of our love. And maybe that's work that you all as church councils and in different offices where you have power and influence, maybe investing together in Sabbath is something that needs to be done.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jeff. I'm so thrilled that you're going to be back with us this afternoon in conversation with Diana and with Adam and Christy here. Thank you
Yes,
for blessing us.
I will see you this afternoon. And what I'm also going to do, just in case there were any folks who were too shy to ask questions, I just put my email address in the chat box. So if you were too afraid, that's okay. I get it. I don't like to talk either.
Oh, God bless you, Jeff. And seriously, I got a couple of text messages then that basically said, if you continue to have trouble with RCA, you might consider moving 100 miles north.
You got to open that border first.
Welcoming Lutherans that are here.
Thank you.
God bless you. We'll see you later.
Yeah, take care.